There are families that do not rule through love, and they do not rule through fear. Either they rule through memory, or rather through the careful rewriting of it. Over time, the past becomes less a record of what happened and more a script handed down by those who benefited the most. Events are softened, words are rephrased, intentions are polished, until the truth feels inconvenient and silence feels responsible. In such homes, questioning history is treated as betrayal, and remembering clearly is mistaken for disrespect. The powerful are never loud here. They are calm, reasonable, and deeply certain of their version of events. They speak of unity while erasing accountability, of tradition while denying harm, of sacrifice while demanding obedience. And the most dangerous part is this: the longer the lie survives, the more natural it feels. But memory has a quiet strength. It waits, and when it returns unchanged, unafraid, it exposes what control has tried so desperately to hide. The art of selective memory is not an accident in families where control must be preserved. It is a carefully maintained system. Nothing is forgotten at random. What is remembered is chosen, polished, repeated, and protected, while what threatens authority is quietly dismissed as misunderstanding, exaggeration, or emotional weakness. Over time, this editing of the past becomes so consistent that it no longer feels like manipulation. It feels like tradition. Stories are told again and again, always with the same pauses, the same emphasis, the same moral conclusion. Certain moments are elevated into legends: the sacrifices that justify power, the hardships that demand eternal gratitude, the generosity that supposedly cancels every later wound. Meanwhile, other moments are reduced to footnotes or erased entirely: the raised voices, the broken promises, the fear that lingered long after the room went quiet. And because these omissions are never openly discussed, they gain a strange authority. Silence begins to sound like truth. In such families, memory becomes a tool of hierarchy. Those at the top remember with confidence. Those below are encouraged to doubt themselves. If you recall pain, you are told you are sensitive. If you remember injustice, you are reminded of everything that was done for you. The past is not debated, it is declared, and the declaration always favors the same people. Over time, this creates a dangerous imbalance. One version of history is repeated until it feels objective, while all other versions are treated as emotional reactions rather than lived experience. The result is not unity but compliance. People stop speaking not because they agree, but because remembering out loud has consequences. Selective memory also thrives on timing. It does not deny events immediately. It waits. It allows the moment to pass, the emotions to fade, the witnesses to scatter. Then, when the story is retold later, it returns altered, softer, cleaner, less threatening. The sharp edges are rounded off, responsibility is blurred, intentions are emphasized over impact, and because time has passed, the rewritten version sounds reasonable. Anyone who challenges it appears stuck in the past, unable to move on. In this way, memory is weaponized not through force, but through patience. What makes this process especially powerful is its appearance of calm. There is no shouting required to rewrite history. The voice is steady. The tone is disappointed rather than angry. Phrases are carefully chosen. That's not how it happened. You're remembering it wrong. You were too young to understand. Each sentence is delivered as clarification, not correction. Guidance, not control. And yet, with each repetition, confidence is transferred away from the person who lived the experience and toward the person who benefits from redefining it. Eventually, the individual begins to hesitate before speaking, unsure whether their memory is accurate, unsure whether their pain is justified. Over time, selective memory reshapes identity itself. When your version of the past is consistently dismissed, you learn to edit yourself. You soften your language. You question your reactions. You preface your truth with apologies. You begin to wonder whether the problem was never the event, but your response to it. This internal doubt is not accidental. It is the long-term result of being told, repeatedly and subtly, that your perception is unreliable. And once a person stops trusting their memory, they become easier to manage. Control no longer needs to be enforced externally, it lives inside. Yet selective memory has a weakness. It depends on repetition without interruption. It requires silence from those who remember differently. The moment someone speaks with clarity, not aggression, not emotion, but calm certainty, the system begins to fracture. Because truth does not need embellishment. It does not need to be retold perfectly. It remains consistent, even when questioned. And while selective memory grows stronger through avoidance, truth grows stronger through examination. This keynote is not about arguing with the past, nor about convincing anyone who refuses to listen. It is about recognizing the pattern, understanding that when memory is controlled, power is protected, and realizing that remembering clearly is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of self-respect. Because the past does not belong to those who benefited most from it, it belongs to those who lived it. And once memory is reclaimed, selective storytelling loses its grip, and quiet control begins to weaken. When silence is remanded pace. In families where power must remain undisturbed, silence is rarely presented as silence. It is dressed up, renamed, and celebrated as peace. You are told that harmony matters more than honesty, that keeping things calm is a sign of maturity, and that revisiting the past only causes unnecessary damage. Slowly, speaking becomes synonymous with disruption, and quiet endurance is praised as wisdom. This rebranding is subtle and effective, because no one openly commands you to stay silent. Instead, you are rewarded for it. Approval follows compliance. Acceptance follows restraint. And over time, silence stops feeling forced and starts feeling responsible. This kind of peace is not built on understanding, it is built on avoidance. Difficult conversations are postponed indefinitely, not because the time is never right, but because resolution would require accountability. Silence allows unresolved issues to fade into the background, while the appearance of unity remains intact. Family gatherings continue. Rituals are observed. Smiles are exchanged, and from the outside, everything looks stable. But beneath this surface, calm, unspoken tensions accumulate. What is never addressed does not disappear. It simply waits. And in this waiting, silence becomes a storage space for unresolved pain. The pressure to maintain this version of peace often falls on those who are most affected by the past. They are expected to be flexible, understanding, and forgiving, long before there is any acknowledgement of harm. Their discomfort is framed as impatience. Their questions are framed as disrespect. They are encouraged to be the bigger person, a phrase that sounds noble but often means carrying a burden that was never theirs to begin with. In this way, silence becomes a moral obligation, and speaking becomes a moral failure. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is its emotional leverage. Silence is tied to belonging. To speak is to risk being labeled difficult, ungrateful, or divisive. The unspoken message is clear. Peace is conditional, and it is maintained only as long as certain topics remain untouched. This creates an environment where people begin to self-monitor. They rehearse conversations in their minds and then abandon them. They sense when a memory is unwelcome and redirect themselves. The room does not need to say stop. The atmosphere already has. Over time, this rebranded peace reshapes relationships. Conversations become shallow, carefully curated to avoid discomfort. Authentic connection is replaced by polite coexistence. People may sit at the same table for years without ever feeling seen or understood. The absence of conflict is mistaken for closeness, even as emotional distance grows. And because everything appears calm, the cost of silence remains invisible. No one counts the nights spent replaying conversations that never happened, or the quiet exhaustion of constantly holding back. Silence also has a way of protecting narratives. When no one speaks, the official version of the past remains unchallenged. Peace, in this sense, is not neutral. It actively favors those who benefit from things staying the same. The past is allowed to settle into a single story, and that story gains authority through repetition and lack of opposition. Silence gives it room to solidify, and once it does, questioning it later feels even more disruptive, even more dangerous. Yet this kind of peace is fragile. It relies on suppression, not resolution. The moment silence breaks, sometimes years later, the reaction is often disproportionate. not because the words are extreme, but because the system was never designed to handle truth. When honesty finally surfaces, it is labeled as sudden, aggressive, or unnecessary, even though it has been quietly forming for a long time. This reaction reveals what the silence was really protecting all along. This keynote is not an argument for constant confrontation, nor does it dismiss the value of calm. It is a reminder that peace without truth is not peace at all. It is postponement. Real peace does not require anyone to disappear. It does not demand selective memory or emotional restraint as proof of loyalty. True peace can withstand conversation. It can survive discomfort. The hero mask worn by the duality. In families where the past must remain carefully arranged, power often survives behind a familiar disguise, the hero mask. It is worn not loudly, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty that demands admiration without ever asking for it. This mask is built from selected sacrifices, repeated stories of endurance, and carefully emphasized intentions. The message is subtle but constant. Everything that happened was necessary. Everything that was done was for your good. Over time, this framing becomes untouchable, because questioning it feels like questioning the very foundation of the family's identity. The hero mask works by shifting focus away from impact and toward effort. What mattered most, you are told, was not how actions felt to those who received them, but how difficult they were for the one who performed them. Struggle becomes proof of virtue. Exhaustion becomes evidence of righteousness. And once effort is placed above outcome, accountability becomes almost impossible. Any harm that occurred is reclassified as an unfortunate side effect of good intentions. In this way, the past is not denied. It is reframed. This reframing creates a powerful emotional dilemma for those who remember differently. Gratitude is expected, not because care was perfect, but because sacrifice was declared. You are reminded of what was provided, what was endured, what was given up. These reminders are not presented as demands, yet they function as debts. To acknowledge pain feels like ingratitude. To question behavior feels like betrayal. The hero mask does not need to silence others directly. It relies on their reluctance to appear ungrateful. What makes this mask especially effective is its consistency. The same stories are told at gatherings, often with a tone of humility that feels sincere. The same moments are highlighted, the same struggles recalled, the same moral drawn. Over time, these stories stop sounding like one perspective and start sounding like history itself. Alternative memories feel smaller by comparison, almost inappropriate to bring up in the presence of such apparent devotion. And so they remain unspoken. The hero mask also redefines roles within the family. Those who wear it are positioned as the moral center, the ones whose choices must be trusted, whose judgments should not be questioned. Others are cast as beneficiaries rather than participants. Their experiences are filtered through the hero's narrative, interpreted rather than acknowledged. When they attempt to speak for themselves, they are gently corrected, not dismissed, outright corrected. The tone remains calm, even caring, which makes resistance feel unreasonable. Over time, this dynamic creates a quiet distortion of reality. The past becomes a story of noble endurance rather than shared experience. Complexity is reduced, contradictions are smoothed over. And because the hero mask presents itself as selfless, challenging, it feels almost cruel. Who questions someone who did their best? Who asks for accountability from someone who gave everything? These phrases are not arguments, yet they end conversations all the same. But the hero mask has limits. It depends on constant reinforcement and unchallenged repetition. It cannot tolerate nuance. The moment someone separates intention from impact, the mask begins to crack. Because acknowledging harm does not erase sacrifice, but it does require humility. And humility is the one thing the mask cannot provide without collapsing. This keynote is not about denying effort or dismissing hardship. It is about recognizing when sacrifice is used as a shield rather than a truth. True care does not fear reflection. It does not require admiration to justify itself, and it does not demand silence in exchange for provision. When the hero mask is finally seen for what it is, a narrative designed to preserve moral authority, the past begins to breathe again. Power built on selective heroism is fragile. It relies on a single story being told without interruption. But lived experience is not a performance, and memory is not a script. When people reclaim their right to describe their own past without apology, the mask loses its hold. And what remains, stripped of mythology, is the possibility of honesty, something far more powerful than any carefully constructed legend. Gaslighting disquidist as goodance in families where control must remain subtle. Manipulation rarely announces itself as force. It arrives instead as concern, advice, and reassurance. It sounds reasonable. It feels protective, and because it is delivered in the language of care, it often goes unquestioned. This is how gaslighting survives, by disguising itself as guidance. The intention is never stated as control, it is framed as correction, clarification, or wisdom passed down for your own benefit. Over time, this distinction becomes dangerously blurred. The process begins gently. A memory is challenged, not with hostility, but with calm disbelief. That's not quite how it happened. You're focusing on the wrong part. You misunderstood what was meant. Each statement sounds helpful, almost generous, as if someone is offering to steady your perspective. And because the tone is composed, the message feels credible. You hesitate not because you are convinced, but because you are unsure. That hesitation is the opening. As these corrections accumulate, a pattern forms. Your experiences are not rejected outright. They are reshaped. The emotional weight you carry is labeled excessive. Your reactions are described as overthinking. Your recollections are attributed to stress, sensitivity, or immaturity. Meanwhile, the guiding voice remains consistent and confident. It does not argue, it explains. It does not accuse, it advises. And slowly, authority over reality begins to shift. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is its moral framing. Guidance implies superiority of understanding. It suggests that the one correcting you sees more clearly, knows better, and wants what is best for you. Questioning that guidance feels ungrateful, even disrespectful. After all, who rejects advice given out of love? In this way, doubt is planted not only in memory but in character. You begin to wonder whether resisting guidance means you are flawed rather than perceptive. Over time, this repeated redirection erodes self-trust. You start to pre-edit your thoughts before expressing them. You second-guess your reactions. You look for confirmation before believing your own experience. And when no confirmation comes, you retreat inward. This retreat is mistaken for growth, for maturity, for learning to listen. In reality, it is the quiet withdrawal of confidence. Gaslighting, disguised as guidance, also reshapes how boundaries are perceived. When you attempt to assert one, it is interpreted as confusion. When you express discomfort, it is met with explanation rather than empathy. The focus shifts away from how you feel and toward how you should feel. And because the exchange remains polite, even warm, the imbalance is difficult to name. There is no obvious conflict, only a persistent sense of being subtly corrected out of yourself. This form of manipulation thrives on repetition rather than intensity. No single moment feels extreme enough to confront. Instead, the effect is cumulative. Each small correction seems harmless, but together they form a system in which one voice defines reality and the other adapts to survive. Over time, the adapted voice grows quieter, less certain, more dependent on approval to feel stable. Yet this system depends entirely on one condition: your willingness to doubt yourself. The moment you pause and observe the pattern, not the words, but the outcome, the disguise begins to fail. Guidance that consistently leaves you feeling smaller, less certain, and disconnected from your own memory is not guidance at all. It is control wrapped in calmness. This keynote is not a call to reject advice or dismiss wisdom. True guidance empowers. It strengthens discernment rather than replacing it. It invites dialogue instead of shutting it down. And it respects lived experience as valid, even when it is uncomfortable to hear. When guidance becomes a one-way correction of reality, it loses its moral ground. Once this distinction is recognized, something shifts. You no longer need to argue or defend every memory. You simply stop surrendering your perception. You listen, you observe, and you choose what aligns with your truth. And in that choice, gaslighting loses its power because clarity, once reclaimed, does not need permission to exist. Truth as the one thing they cannot control. In families where power has depended on rewritten memories, controlled silence, heroic myths, and disguised guidance, there is one force that remains deeply unsettling, truth that no longer seeks approval. Not truth shouted in anger, not truth used as a weapon, but truth held calmly, clearly, and without apology. This kind of truth does not argue for space, it simply occupies it. And because it cannot be managed through persuasion or denial, it becomes the one thing control cannot fully contain. Truth begins its work quietly. It does not announce itself with confrontation or demand recognition. It starts internally, when a person stops editing their memories to fit someone else's comfort, when experiences are no longer softened to maintain peace, and pain is no longer minimized to preserve hierarchy, something fundamental shifts. The past regains its original shape, not exaggerated, not dramatized, but intact. And once this happens, the old systems of influence lose their footing. What makes truth so threatening is its independence. It does not rely on agreement to exist. It does not need to be validated by authority figures or repeated by the group to feel real. In fact, truth often grows stronger in solitude,